brief introduction. I'm Nick. I'm really just a hype man. We've got Mark on the console, and we're going to have Eric and Chris do most of the actual talking. But yeah, so this is us. If you want to gab on Twitter because your mouths are full, feel free to. We're there. Feel free to say hi or hashtag #StartupToolsUp. Yeah, so just chatting with you guys briefly, it seems like there's a lot of you here who are interested in either working for startups or kind of want to see what, like what tools startups use because you're interested in getting a job with startups, or because you have projects of your own and you're kind of interested in just making it happen. So that's oh yeah, we should talk a bit about that. That's good. Really? That's fantastic. So yeah, we are Axiom Zen. Well, we like to build ourselves as a collective of just kind of like-minded hackers who got together one day and formed a company and started making stuff. That's mostly true. But that is what we do nowadays. We kind of have this awesome setup where, unlike most startups who have one idea and they kind of run against the wall until they run out of money, we're pretty cool in that we take on projects from other people that we find interesting, that kind of help us grow, that kind of help us build technologies that we're interested in. And we kind of use that to fund our own internal development, so tools that we're interested in. So things like ZenHub, which will come later on, other things like Bluetooth Low Energy, Google Glass, and other kind of wearables. So that's us in a nutshell. And if you want to learn more about us, you can check us out at axiomzen.co. Yeah, that's pretty good. So what we're going to do today is just kind of have this whirlwind tour of tools we use to kind of take ideas from kind of head to web. And we're going to start off with just web for now, and Chris is going to talk about that in a second. But the idea here is that hopefully you guys will leave this with at least a vague understanding of the kind of tools we use, and more importantly, kind of where you can start if you want to do this yourself. So please don't worry about taking notes. We'll put up slides online. We'll put up slides online that you can find after. So just kind of sit back, roll with it, and kind of let it wash over you. But the really exciting part, at the same time as we talk about tools we're going to use, Mark is actually going to make a web app. How crazy is that? Yeah! So crazy. Yeah. So try not to distract him too much.
So part of the tools that we're going to show, the reason why we want to show them to you is because we want to inspire you to start building your own stuff too. The big part about building your own stuff on the side as a hobby also makes you much more hireable than those who don't. So what we want to do is kind of like inspire you and show you, not just tell you, but actually demonstrate how these startup tools make you super productive. So that's kind of the goal that we...
Yeah. Whether it's making your own projects or even just kind of finding a job with a startup in the future, because not everyone wants to work with .NET. And on that note, here's Chris.
So, yeah, I found when I was in university, like there was a lot of theory and very little sort of practice and making things and seeing things come alive. And times have changed, definitely. So there's definitely a lot of tools and frameworks and libraries out there that make it actually pretty easy to kind of just get something going and get something working. And you can yeah, and it doesn't take that much effort. So, and it doesn't take you like a long time as well to.
You want to go to the show of hands?
Sure. How many people, I guess, know what like a web stack is? Okay, so it's worth explaining, I guess.
Yes.
So, some things have changed, but some things have not changed. So, the basic architecture of web apps, and the reason we're doing a web app is that's mostly what Axiom Zen does, and we have a limited amount of time to get something running. So, so yeah, we're gonna focus on like a web app, and the basic stack or layers of the application have basically stayed the same. There's a few interesting developments, but basically. You start from the back end, so you have like a server and you have database and things like that, and you work your way towards the front end, or what people see, so what a web browser sees and mobile and that kind of thing. So
the stack is basically all the little components of the back end, front end database stack. stacked together that make up your application.
So it still basically works on the client-server paradigm. So you basically have you still need like a server, which is a computer running somewhere, and it runs an operating system, and it's able to serve files or HTTP, and you're able to connect to it. And it usually will talk to a database if you need to persist stuff. So if you're browsing a website and you're inputting some data, like you want it to be there tomorrow and not have to enter it again. Very simple stuff. In between sort of the database and the server-side sort of application, so maybe I'll talk about that first. So typically, like you need, if it's a non-trivial sort of static HTML website, you need some way to kind of write code on the server. So you need some sort of application framework, and then oftentimes when the server application will talk to the database, and it's often nice to be able to use objects when you do that. So you can use an ORM, which maps your database schema into nice objects that you can call from your server-side application code. And then from there, you move towards the front end of the stack. So in today's world, there could be many front ends. So there could be web browsers, there could be mobile web browsers, there could be native apps, like a native Mac app, or like a native Windows app, or even a native like mobile app. So you typically want to give yourself what's called an API. Who knows what an API is? Okay, so it's just basically like it's a list of functions that your various clients can call, and you're able to separate and the server side and generic side sort of what you're giving to the client, so that it's a lot easier to develop and maintain, because all your sort of code and logic comes from one access point. That's the basic idea. Does anyone have any questions about or want further explanation? So back-end frameworks, yeah.
Yeah, so we're gonna be not just continuing with dry information about all these different components. Instead, we want to show you building a full stack application, and then step by step we'll talk about these things in a little more detail. So the back-end is the heart of the application. That's where the application logic resides. That's what communicates the data from the database and presents it or gives it to the front end to present. So Eric will talk a bit about the backend.
So the backend, for the backend actually, this is the next slide. I'm just curious, how many of you guys know all of these backends? Raise your hands. We have one person? Nice, 2 people? That's actually really impressive. How many of you guys have worked with, let's say, one of these? Okay.
How many of you have worked with one that wasn't Java?
Alright, well, so because the talk is about free tools that you can use, Rails, Node, Django, Go, I mean, they're all free, they're all pretty popular nowadays. In particular, for our demo today, Mark is going to pick up Node, and he's going to write his app completely in Node. To note though, a lot of companies are picking Rails nowadays. The reason being is because you can get something going really fast. Rails has a lot of magic, they like to say, going behind the scenes. It does a lot of heavy lifting for you. However, if you don't understand what's going on behind the scenes, you can get in somewhat of trouble. So, and just to go with this slide, you'll notice that each of these backend frameworks, they correspond to a specific language. So Rails, you're going to be writing in Ruby. Node, you're going to be writing in JavaScript. Django, you're going to be writing in Python. And well, Go is technically a language, but they don't have a backend so far. It's a pretty new language, and it's probably going to grow pretty big pretty soon. But I also want to point out that there are also different backends for each specific language. For example, in Ruby, you can also just run Sinatra in your backend. So there's a lot of options out there. There's no specific tool that is great for every situation. Every time we get a client, we take a look at the tools that we have on hand, and we pick the right tool for that client and for that job.
So yeah, we put non-free ones on there like Microsoft ASP.NET. They're still cheap in that you can get the free version of Visual Studio and you can get free version of Microsoft SQL. That's limited to 1 gigabyte, but you can still use it. ASP.NET and the .NET framework is still free, so it's still, you can kind of get going with something there. But if you want to have full power and have that free, then yeah, you need to go to a completely open source sort of technology. There's trade-offs between open source and free, but for us and for the purposes of this talk, we're going to focus on free. So should we talk about what we're going to build?
Yeah, so for this demo, we're going to be using Express. So Express is actually a web framework on top of Node.js. Who of you knows JavaScript? Okay. So I'm just going to go ahead and issue this command. What it does is building you a basic scaffold of the application that we're going to build. So by just doing that, you'll see that it created a lot of files for you. And you're pretty much halfway there of your web app. That's the beauty of modern day open source technology. You just issue a few commands and you're done. So
I have a question mark.
Yeah.
So how come you didn't choose Rails instead of?
We'll get to that. That can be a really long answer.
Long discussion.
Yeah, so let me just show you what I just did by installing the dependencies. And let's see if we can run the server.
Now, if you guys have any questions about the demo, I guarantee you everyone in this room will be able to do this. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to come up to us after the talk, ask us any questions.
Yeah, so what we're doing right now is actually quite ambitious, like building a live demo in real time during the presentation. I don't know, it's kind of crazy. So I will be glancing over details really fast, but the purpose of this is kind of to give you an idea and pointers to later go back and see how the things piece together.
Yeah, we want you guys to leave this room thinking like, well, Mark did this in 40 minutes or something. I can definitely do that. You guys can leave this room and go build your own app within maybe not 40 minutes, but you'll be able to do it.
So what I just did was start the server, and you'll see in localhost that you have your app running. There you go, halfway there. So what will we be actually building? So every startup idea or good product has to solve a real-life problem. So the real-life problem that we have here and that we have come up with is the fact that every talk will have a Q&A session at the end. And usually, when the speaker finishes up and, are there any questions? That could be like a deadpan. Nobody's raising their hands, or there's this intellectual in the back that has been thinking about this really good question but is too shy to ask, So that's the problem that we're going to solve by building a web app. By the end of this, you'll be able to post your questions through your mobile phone onto the big screen. Right? You don't believe me? Cool. Alright, so let's do this. So the scaffolding has created a bunch of files for me. App.js is basically the main server file. It's created a bunch of views for me. But I'm going to delete these because we're not going to need them. Maybe you can talk a bit about the Mvc structures, the routes controlling the views. I can do that. So what happens here? You go to localhost 3000, it hits the app here, which is defining the different routes. So if you go to the root, what it does, it is redirecting you to this controller. Now the controller is basically the part where your business logic lives. The view is the part that is presenting the client with what should be shown in your web browser, and that's here. You'll notice that this is not just HTML. You'll notice that this is not just CSS. So maybe we can talk a bit about the preprocessors.
Yeah, so nowadays we use a lot of preprocessors. So even for, like you see in HTML, we don't need all the brackets anymore. You can use slim, you can use j. They're all just preprocessors. They take in your HTML code, they spit out some, or they take in kind of shorthand HTML code, and they're still able to compile HTML for you. It's just a lot easier to write. You don't have to worry about, missing a close bracket or something. Although a lot of them you do have to worry about your tabbing because the compilers do count the tabs. So other than for HTML, there's preprocessor. We also use for JavaScript. There's CoffeeScript. I'm hoping some of you guys have heard of that.
So what I'm doing now is converting all the JavaScript to CoffeeScript because it's easier to follow if you don't know JavaScript.
Right, so I'm sure you guys can just kind of read the code. You guys can follow along with the logic. You might not know the syntax, but that's not really the important thing of the demo.
So you mentioned the controller in Vue. Is there a model as well?
The model, well, for our simple demo, we won't have a model because the model is going to be just a question. So for the purposes of time, we're just going to keep it really simple.
So who has heard of model view controller of that paradigm? Yeah. So a lot of these frameworks are based off of that. They sort of have that embedded in their design. So while Mark is doing that, I guess we can talk about some of the database options.
So I can also mention that what I'm going to do now, so we got this running, and what we want to do is basically allow you guys to start posting questions. So we need to make a route and a controller to handle that. So I'll be doing that in the background as well.
Okay. Okay, yeah, so are you still going to use Redis or no? Yeah, okay. So one of the things that has changed definitely since I've gone to school is databases. And who has heard of the NoSQL? Who's heard the term NoSQL? Okay. So let's just maybe go over what has kind of changed. So the cost of storage has gone down. So hard drives. And as a result of that, the amount of data, and as a result of just the expanse of the internet, the amount of data that's being collected has gone way up. People like to call this big data. And a lot of the old systems don't scale well. They were based on assumptions that your table's not any bigger than a million rows or something. So a lot of the older systems, like SQL type systems, type databases, they start to slow down. The queries start to slow down. The amount of RAM that you can get on a system has gone up. Another thing is that with Facebook and any kind of social media site, even there's a new site called Freebase, which is kind of a knowledge graph of various pieces of information like music and history and that kind of stuff. What they've done is realize that there's value in the relationships between things. So in a standard SQL database, they're called, or they usually have an R relational database management system wrapped around them. And despite the name, they actually don't really work that well with storing information about the relationships. So that's another thing that's come up. And simplicity. Basically, scaling SQL databases can be tricky. And if you are looking for something really simple, like you just need to serve documents that aren't really related to each other, or you can unnormalize your data and put it in sort of a flat format, then you don't really need all of the overhead of an SQL database. You can go with a NoSQL database. And so there's lots of options, and there's lots of variables, and this is kind of like a slide that gives you an idea. Probably can't see anything there, but basically there's in-memory variants of SQL databases and NoSQL databases. There's whether you want ACID transaction, ACID, like the database is ACID or base. There's if you want to store documents, or if you want to store objects and keys, if you want to store data structures, or if you want to store graph information. There's now dedicated and open source graph databases that specialize in traversing graphs and are optimized for doing that.
So let me just interrupt right there. What we have here, let me just show you what I just did. So this is not your typical HTML that you'll see, but this is J, but it will compile into HTML. It's a simple form that posts to the route ask, and the controller that will take care of the data that comes in is defined here. So what we're doing here is simply get the question out of the body, store it in an array, and then render the thanks view. So that's when the request comes into the controller and then goes to the view. And the view being this one. So what happens is, hello, if you have a question, you submit, thank you, and you'll see how many questions there are. So this is right now all living on the server's memory because I'm using the array. But yeah, that's when databases come in.
So what kind of database are you going to use, Mark?
I'll be using Redis for this simple example. Why Redis? Because Redis is a data structure store, so you can have simple stacks. Because what we want here is a queue, basically. You ask questions, and then we just pop one out on the other side as they come in.
Is it stored in memory?
Still asking.
Okay, he's busy. So yeah, Redis. So one of the really cool things is that, yeah, so the RAM has gone up, and if your data set is small enough, you can actually just throw the whole data set in RAM, and you don't ever access the disk, and so that becomes really fast. So Redis is an in-memory data structure database, and that's what we're going to be using because it already has a bunch of like libraries and utilities that will support a queue. So you just tell Redis to push and pop. And so,
does that all disappear if the server crashes?
Sorry?
Does it all disappear then if the server crashes?
Yeah, so you have to worry about persistence.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
So what I'll be doing how do you actually do this in practice? So I just installed Redis here with this simple line. npm is a package manager. It's kind of like, you just issue a command, it will download and install it for you. Very useful. So I have Redis running on my local server right now on my computer. And where I previously had an array, I'm going to just replace it using Redis. So let's see. So I'll require Redis here and create a client. So instead of this client,
So is everyone totally like, yeah, I got this. I'm following along. I'm ready to go. Yeah? How many of you are like, good so far? How many of you are like, oh, I think I get it? Maybe there's a couple questions? Yeah? And how many of you are like, oh my god, I have no idea what's going on? I like you guys in the back there. Yeah, so like, while this is going, just let it wash over you. It's they're all.
So in just a couple of lines, I just replaced the array memory store to an actual pushing it into a Reddit instance. So now, if I restart the server and I come back to here, you'll see that the count is not reset, but it just continues. So that's the purpose of a database persisting.
Yeah. So, well, yeah, and it's a good question to ask. So, like, what happens? Yeah, if the server crashes, yes, all the memory will be gone. So, what Redis does, I think, is there some like logging functionality where it'll like write to disk like every, no, it's probably yeah, every second over. It's probably configurable. So, but you have to architect your system to sort of keep that in mind. And there's trade-offs with all of these technologies, and yeah, there's just a lot of different kinds. We've used Mongo. We're looking into Neo4j. Neo4j is a graph database. Mongo is a document store database. MySQL is just a standard SQL-based SQL-based database, and then Redis. So yeah, if you're building a shopping cart, you would use something like Mongo. Simplicity, scaling is really easy, so it's built for that kind of thing. If you have a lot of employees in a table and you want to ask it what the average income is, use SQL. If you have geodata and you're looking for like routes or something like that, use a graph database, that kind of thing. So, we're not quite at the front end. Should we talk about front end? We kind of glossed over it.
Sure, yeah, we're getting there.
Okay.
So front end, after you grab all, after you get data from the database, I mean, you get stuff from the model and you want to push it into the view, then that's where the front end comes. Mark is about to get there with this code.
Yeah. Like the website looks kind of ugly right now, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's all just text and input right now. It looks like the default HTML5 stuff, but we'll be getting to that and we'll be styling it with CSS3. I'm sure a lot of you guys know what that is. HTML5 has a lot of functionality now, and there's even like WebRTC, which you can do peer-to-peer video chats and stuff. That's all in HTML5. JavaScript is JavaScript. And jQuery is actually a library that makes a lot of front-end work a lot easier. It basically does, what's the word I'm looking for here? jQuery. Yeah, it does a lot, and it's a library that almost everyone uses now. So, are you almost at the front end?
You can talk about
Oh, so next slide. So for the front-end frameworks, CSS frameworks, a lot of you guys should be looking at Twitter Bootstrap. It's free, it's super easy to use, and a lot of big names out there actually do use Twitter Bootstrap. You just modify it a little bit. And you'll see that Twitter Bootstrap has like the grid layout, everything's already set for you. It has certain button structures that you can use, certain pull-down bars that you can use. It makes CSS super easy, it makes your web app look very nice and very quickly. And on the other hand, there's tons of free CSS frameworks like Foundation that we put up as well. But you can look up a lot. There's like Flat UI out there as well, and there's quite a few. You can just look for one that you like and just go ahead and use it.
All right, so where are we at now? Okay, so hello there. Thank you for asking. Let's ask another question. There we go. Now we can fetch the questions one by one. And so what's happening here is basically every time you ask a question, you're pushing it into Redis, and every time you want to fetch one, you're just telling it to give you the first one that came in. And then that's what the controller does. It'll interact with the Redis database, and then it'll spit it back to the view to render it on the screen. Next question?
Yeah, does the technology you're using right now, does that validate the data that's going to that form? Does it do that automatically, or do you do that right now?
Validating meaning?
Like, if I was to insert SQL into that.
Oh, right. No, we're not talking about that right now. I don't think we can fit that in the 1 hour talk.
We do have to worry about that. We do sanitize all the inputs if we were to work on a client application or our own projects, right?
But we
should
trust you
be
guys.
sanitized.